Halito, this is Boke with the Boke Oakchamala YouTube channel, and we are attempting to record my second book review video. And today I'm reviewing The Terraformers by Annalee Newitz. This is a science fiction slash speculative fiction book. I really enjoyed it and I can't wait to talk about it. Before we dive into the review, a few things. One, I really fucking hope this works because I spent a long ass time last night trying to record this review and I just was beset with technical issue after technical issue. Like, I normally use QuickTime to record long form videos with my webcam, but QuickTime would randomly stop recording, so I'd be talking for like 20, 30, 45 minutes and then realize only 5 minutes of it had even been recorded. The software I'm trying now is OBS, which is honestly not super duper user friendly, and what little I've used it, I can see that the picture quality will like flicker. I don't know the technical word for it. Like, there'll be a few like black frames out of nowhere. I've decided I'm just gonna power through. We'll see what happens. Second thing, my other book review video was spontaneous. It wasn't scripted. This video, I wrote the review first just to sort of get my thoughts in order, and then I ended up liking it so much that I was like, I'm just gonna read from this for the video. So we'll see how that goes. And then third, this review is not spoiler free. So if you want to read the Terraformers without spoilers, now's your chance to exit out of the video. But without further ado, let's pull up my review here and jump into it. So I want to start by saying that I adored this book. I thought it was so creative. I thought it was so fun. I thought it was thought-provoking. I thought it was surprisingly educational. I loved the solarpunk aspect. I loved the anarchist philosophy. I loved the different discussions about personhood and sentience. I loved the organic technology. I loved how much I learned as I was reading. Like, I was reading and learning about terraforming itself, about the carbon cycle, about self-governance, about waterways. Like, I felt like I came away from this with so much more knowledge about these topics and a desire to learn even more about them. I'm a really big fan of sci-fi and spec fic, and after mostly reading dystopian books, it was a real pleasure to read about a futuristic high-tech society that isn't a cyberpunk nightmare wasteland devoid of hope or promise for once. There are realistic players in the Terraformers that you'll probably recognize as tropes from these genres. So of course you've got your huge evil megacorps, although some of the megacorp people were actually portrayed with some nuance. And then of course you got to have your scrappy rebels, and some of those scrappy rebels were also portrayed realistically with human flaws and human foibles and human poor decisions. I do have some critiques, mostly about characterization and pacing, stakes specifically, but I'll get into that a bit later. So let's talk about the overall plot of the book. The Terraformers takes place way, way, way into the future. Humans, which are often referred to as hominids in the narrative, have expanded far beyond their home planet of Earth and are now colonizing every Earth-like planet they can get their greedy little graspers on. In order to facilitate this goal, huge terraforming companies like Verdance, which is one of the main entities slash antagonists in the Terraformers, find suitable planets with the right gravity, water, sunlight, etc., and spend centuries or longer making the planet habitable for humans. So this means they have to introduce the right levels of oxygen into the atmosphere, they have to carefully monitor the food chain of all the different ecosystems, they have to oversee the carbon cycle, they have to do all these different things so that the planet is habitable. Once the planet is fairly Earth-like in terms of flora, fauna, biomes, then it is prime real estate, baby. Hominids and other people, which more on that in a moment, can purchase extremely expensive remote bodies so they can experience life on a pristine Earth as if they were there in the flesh. Or if they have oodles of cash and access to space transportation, they can outright buy property and become settlers themselves. So the remote body is basically this very expensive android that is able to move through the world and then you, perhaps hundreds of thousands of miles away, you have like a wireless access, so it's as if you're there kind of experiencing what that android remote body is experiencing, which is kind of interesting. Anyway, if you're thinking that all of this sounds like it could be an exploration of how settler colonialism might play out aeons into the future, then you would be right on the money, because that is a major theme of the Terraformers. So the main characters of the book change 4 or 5 times throughout the story. The first main character is Destry, who is an employee of the Environmental Response Team, or ERT for short. So the ERT is an organization whose entire purpose is to oversee the delicate balance of all the components that comprise a planet's environment: carbon, water, light, food networks, etc. Verdance works with the ERT to make sure that their terraforming projects are successful. After all, you can't advertise a beautiful, unpolluted, untouched planet virtually indistinguishable from Earth in its Pleistocene era if you let settlers make a bunch of carbon and throw the climate out of whack, or dump hazardous wastes into the water supply all willy-nilly. There's a fascinating interplay between the megacorps and the ERT. Their goals align when it comes to preserving the environment of a planet, mostly, but then these entities will butt heads when the companies start getting greedy and cutting corners in order to facilitate faster sales and higher return on investment. Anyway, the main plot of the novel kicks off when Destry and some other ERT associates discover unusual seismic activity on the planet that is currently being terraformed by Verdance. Upon investigation, the ERT discovers that a secret society has been flourishing deep underground for hundreds of years, right under Verdance's nose. The inhabitants of this huge underground civilization call their home Spider City, and many of them are descendants from Verdance's first wave of terraformers from centuries ago. These original terraformers aren't even Homo sapiens. Rather, they are our distant relatives, similar to like Neanderthals or something. And their bodies, which were genetically altered by Verdance, are uniquely suited to breathe the air on the planet before the oxygen levels are brought up to human range. The thing is, Verdance intended for the first few generations of terraformers to do their jobs preparing the planet for habitation by Homo sapiens and then die. Verdance had no idea that some of the first terraformers would actually secretly retreat underground, far from Verdance's sophisticated and omnipresent surveillance tech, to begin building Spider City. Now, centuries later, the citizens of Spider City aren't too pleased that the planet is almost ready to be divvied up and sold to rich, colonizing assholes. The element of surprise isn't the only thing the Spider City's denizens have over Verdance either. If the megacorp doesn't play nice, then Spider City might have to resort to some explosive measures. Destry finds herself embroiled in a conflict between a collection of rebels and one of the largest and most powerful corporations in the galaxy. Inevitably, she finds herself siding with the Spider City Collective, but at the same time, she is employed by Verdance, and the power it has over both her and the planet itself is almost unassailable. Almost. So that's the hook. Now I want to talk about some of the world building, which was pretty much my favorite part of the Terraformers. First, let's talk a little bit more about Verdance. This megacorp designs, creates, and births its own employees. Well, it'd be more accurate to call them indentured servants, if not outright slaves. But anyway, it is able to design, create, and birth them through this super advanced process called decanting. Technology has advanced to the point where organisms, including sentient humans, can be planned out in labs and grown in artificial wombs. Verdance literally owns its employees. After all, it went through all the trouble of decanting them, and it has a patent on the genetic material used to create them. So they belong to Verdance for the entirety of their lifespan. Verdance can create specific hominids for specific purposes. Not only can the company customize appearance and even species, traits like intelligence can also be engineered according to desired levels. At least that's what Verdance wants you to think. Besides Destry, the other first main character is her moose-like mount, Whistle. Mounts are creatures that have the physical appearance of a riding animal like a horse, but often with various inorganic components to aid in different functions, but the sentience of a human. A mount's job is pretty much right there in the title. Hominids like Destry sometimes need to be able to climb on the back of a mount so it can provide transport over land, sea, and even air. A mount's intelligence and sentience can also confer other benefits, but Verdance doesn't want most mounts to be too intelligent. There is a strict hierarchy present at all levels of the company, and this includes hominids and their mounts. Mounts are strictly second class to their hominid counterparts. The reader discovers that mounts aren't actually any less intelligent or sapient than humans. Rather, Verdance has installed secret intelligence limiters inside the brains of mounts so that they can't be too smart. After all, you wouldn't want a car that could argue with you or randomly decide to take a different course than the one you requested, right? In Whistle's case, his intelligence limiter prevents him from using words more than a few syllables long. As a result, he virtually never speaks, even though he has full verbal ability, because it takes him too long to form sentences that convey his desired meaning without being too syllabic or complex. And much later in the book, this idea of limiting unwanted intelligence in beasts of burden is explored to a terrifying degree when Megacorps create a class of person called a Blessed. One Blessed, aptly named Chef, because her entire life's purpose is to be a chef for a high-ranking Verdance executive, can only talk about things related to cooking or eating. Cleverly, she learns how to work around the intelligence limiter by always mentioning food no matter what subject she addresses. So this plays out in kind of an interesting way where when she first finds the rebel faction, everyone thinks she's fucking weird because she's like, yeah, so I escaped the executive I used to work for, whose favorite food was, fried plantains with balsamic glaze. And then I spent 3 weeks in the woods trying to make my way here, eating mostly a diet of acorns and grub worms. And now that I am here, I'm extremely hungry myself for something with a little more protein. They're like, why are you talking like this? And then they realize her intelligence limiter has forced her to only talk as long as she mentions food and eating. And so that's kind of her workaround. So all of this actually brings up something I mentioned earlier, which is the concept of personhood. Technology exists that can enable any communicative being, robot, car, dishwasher, moose, cat, naked mole rat. It can enable any of those and more to become fully sapient and sentient. This is why the term person no longer just refers to a human, but rather to all kinds of beings. One of my favorite people in the book is a train that was decanted in Spider City and modeled in part after the nervous systems of earthworms. Frequently, the status of person is explored. Whistle was technically a person, but as a mount with limited... Sorry, I'm choking to death. I just ate before I started doing this review. Whistle is technically a person, but as a mount with limited intelligence, he was regularly made to feel like a lower class of person. There's also some debate between characters about the ethics of creating a being that could be a person, but isn't, because the creator chooses not to grant sapience. So, there's this part where some of the mechanical people, so robots, drones, whatever, they get really, disgusted and horrified at the idea of someone making machines that aren't persons, because that sort of raises the question of consent. You build a car which has to spend its entire lifespan transporting others with no thought or desires of its own, and therefore it is subject to a life to which it couldn't consent. Now, speaking of consent, there's a lot in this book that could be described as woke. I generally use that term in a positive context because I'm not a fascist, anti-intellectual, non-empathetic prick, but I have no doubt in my mind that reactionary readers will lambast the terraformers as woke, they, them, commie bullshit. And they'd be partially right about that. Not the bullshit part, but yeah, it's pretty woke, and there's a lot of interesting discussions around gender and pronouns. Also, the political views expressed in the book are not right-wing. The Spider City rebels and the environmental response team are both collectivist and anarchist. They don't have a central leader or governing body that rules unilaterally. I love the way they make decisions as a group. Votes are counted, everyone gets to have a voice. The majority rules, but the minority gets to demand one concession that has to be implemented in the group's final resolution. All throughout the book, there is this theme of hierarchy versus anarchy. So on one end, you've got these huge megacorps like Verdants who are very strictly hierarchical. They have the CEO on the very top, and then the slaves basically at the bottom. And then even within the slaves or servants or employees, there's like a hierarchy where hominids rank higher and then non-hominids, and then organic life is treated as like more worthy than mechanical life. And then on the other end of that spectrum, you've got the ERT and the Spider City rebels and like certain species that are really collectivist, like the naked mole rats, which are a maternal, matriarchal hive mind. I found that really interesting. As far as the they them stuff goes, there's a lot of it. Characters regularly introduce themselves by giving their names and pronouns. Several of the main characters, maybe even the majority, actually use they them, and I tip my hat to Newitz for their ability to write scenes with multiple agender or non-binary characters that aren't confusing. Like, you're never, even when you're reading a conversation between three people that all use they them pronouns, you're never confused about who is saying what. I think that's probably made a little bit easier by the variation of the characters. We've got humans, we've got non-Homo sapiens humans, we've got cats, we've got moose, we've got robot cows, we've got the naked mole rats, we've got sentient doors. There's just a plethora of different kinds of people in the terraformers that get to play a major role. Perhaps one of my only real criticisms in the book is the characterization. The personalities of the characters are sometimes indistinguishable. So you're always clear who is talking, but some of the characters have really rich, grounded, multi-layered personalities that feel real, and then some characters are just forgettable. Destry herself, I would say, unfortunately, is pretty forgettable. Her story comes to an end after, the first part of the book, and then later when she's referenced, I was kind of like, wait, who is this? But some characters are written really well, like the train character I mentioned is one of my favorites. They have this like unique personality, obsessed with online gaming, always looking for ways to find the most optimal, efficient routes, which would make sense for a train. I love the cat character, who is sly and clever, but also very noble and very driven by a sense of the need to do the right thing. But yeah, so the characterization varies character to character. And then my other main criticism would be the lack of stakes. As a reader, I just never truly felt that anyone was in any kind of serious danger. I never thought that the Spider City rebels weren't going to come out on top. There were deaths and violence, but the main characters were pretty protected for most of it. Spoiler alert. Whistle, the mount I mentioned, endures a grievous head injury during a battle with Verdant's drones, but survives. In fact, he comes out better for it, because the cranial trauma disables his intelligence limiters, which results in him being able to express himself fully for the first time in his life. If I were the editor, I would have either explored the idea of the intelligence limiter destruction with another character entirely and had Whistle die, or I would have let him live for a while without the intelligence limiter and then die, because that could really get the reader invested in his journey and then absolutely devastated when the Megacorp kills Whistle with a drone strike or whatever. But that's just me. And as far as Spider City goes, it's revealed fairly early on that the citizens have access to technology that can obliterate the entire planet. It would come at the cost of heavy casualties to their own people, but Verdant's just can't compete with the Spider City weapon because the last thing the company wants to do is nuke its own precious planet that it spent tons of money terraforming. This means that I was never really under the impression that Verdant's had a chance of suppressing the rebels and allowing the planetary destruction. Oh, sorry, I got ahead of myself. This means that I was never really under the impression that Verdant's had a chance of suppressing the rebels, because the only way it could do that is by cutting off its nose to spite its face and allowing the planetary destruction to happen unchecked, if not outright saying fuck it and vaporizing the whole damn thing itself. Which, that immediately makes me have another idea. What if the reader is led to believe that Spider City has Verdant's right where they want them, since there's no way the Megacorp will destroy its own special little investment, but then bam! Verdant's nukes the planet from orbit to teach Spider City a lesson that they will never forget, along with anyone else who's watching the conflict unfold. I might just be a cynic, though. I think I've said most of what I wanted to say about the terraformers. Here's where I'll make a quick list of other things in the book that I thought were cool. We've got the house growing technology, where you plant house seeds like along a trellis, and then over the span of weeks, walls grow and then a roof. I loved the creativity behind the non-Homo sapiens hominids, which those were the first citizens of Spider City. They are hermaphroditic, and they have both female genitalia that they refer to as their petals and male genitalia that they refer to as their stamens. There was this one scene that was, I guess, written to be an erotic scene where a character, one of those characters that's one of the first terraformers, they become aroused, and you get a pretty in-depth description of what is happening to them as they become aroused. It wasn't something that I found arousing, but it was something I found very interesting and very different. And it's, as I was reading it, I was like, oh yeah, this is like real sci-fi. Makes me a tiny little bit uncomfortable, but it's also really interesting and very alien to me. That was a fun experience, honestly, even if it wasn't erotic for me. I love the giant biotechno hybrid flying trains that basically made me picture the cat bus from My Neighbor Totoro. I love the descriptions of food. I love any author that can make food sound fragrant and appetizing and delicious. I love the snarky sentient door to Spider City that later marries an ERT drone. The naked mole rats that had the hive mind, those were interesting. So yeah, all in all, it was a fabulous and engrossing read. It still has my mind churning weeks later. I can't wait to read more by this author. It made me think a little bit of another solarpunk, hopecore, woke book called A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers, and that also features a non-binary protagonist, so there's definitely some overlap with some themes and some ideas. So if you like A Psalm for the Wild Built, definitely check out the Terraformers, or vice versa. Anyway, let me get out of my script here and hopefully find that I'm still recording. Okay, it looks like I am. There were a few little like hiccups in this recording, but I just didn't want to stop what I was doing and fuck with it. So y'all are getting the uncut, unpolished Terraformers review. You're welcome. So thank you again for checking out my channel. Be on the lookout for videos about art, about books, about politics, about queer culture, about indigenous culture, about whatever I feel like. And yeah, chipin sa la chique. Bye.